Okay, so I got several types of mortar here, and I'm going to show you that they all have the standard on the bag somewhere. So I want to see if I can clarify it a little bit more, a better idea of what kind of thinset you should use for what kind of surface and what kind of tile. Okay, so today I want to talk about dry set mortar, commonly referred to as Thinset. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I've actually done several videos on this topic, and I continue to get questions, emails, and questions in the description. What should I use for this? What should I use for that? So I want to see if I can clarify it a little bit more so that you can have a better idea of what kind of thinset you should use for what kind of surface and what kind of tile. Now, if you've never seen my videos before, my name's Sal DeBlasi. I'm a tile contractor in the Boston area. The channel has over 760 videos, pretty much all to do with tile. And I've been installing tile for over 35 years. So I do have an idea what I'm talking about. You can check out my videos. I got all kinds of videos on how to install all kinds of products and tile and the proper methods and standards that you should use. Now, getting back to the Thinset, there's two main types. I'm showing two main types. There's two main types. There's modified and then there's unmodified. What does that mean? Well, unmodified Thinset, in its simplest terms, is just basically sand and Portland cement with a bunch of other components in it, but it's basically that. Modified Thinset, it has the sand, the Portland cement, and polymers in it. The polymers in the mortar are to promote better curing, better adhesion, and help with the curing process, so that you get so the crystals as they grow in the mortar, and that's what mortars do, is they grow crystals and they intertwine and they penetrate into the surfaces and they create a bond. The polymer modified thinsets are designed to retain moisture to help that happen better. Plus they add an adhesive quality to the thinset. An unmodified mortar just only depends on the crystals growing to penetrate into the substrate. So why does that make a difference? Well, depending on the substrate you're going over and the tile you're going over, you may need a mortar with a higher adhesive quality than just a regular thinset mortar. So the two main types of mortar, I think I just said that, was unmodified and modified. So where do you use an unmodified mortar? Well, unmodified mortar almost completely disappeared in its use until Schluter came along and they created, and they had their uncoupling membranes and the waterproofing sheet membranes that required an unmodified mortar, because tile was set between impervious substrates and the modified mortars weren't drying out. Now there's been a development since that actually was the case, because now there's been improvement in mortars where that's not so much of a problem anymore. So getting back to the standards. So if you're looking to use a mortar and you to buy a particular mortar, and you get confused when you go in the store, it'll say mortar to be used on plywood, used for ceramic tile, for porcelain tile, and to list a bunch of the substrates that you can use if you mix it with this or mix it with that. So I'm gonna see if I can make it really easy for you. If you go into the store and you're looking for an unmodified mortar, because that's what you want to use and that's what you've been told to use, then there's this you're going to look for this standard on the bag. It's going to say ANSI A118.1. That's an unmodified mortar, and it actually has very limited uses. I'm not going to go into all the products you can use it on, but it has very limited uses. Most people will use a modified mortar. Now, modified mortars are three basic standards. There's A118.4, which is the lowest tier, A118.11, which is actually EGP mortar, exterior grade plywood, which is a better polymer modified mortar that will adhere to plywood. If you need to install a membrane, or even if you're going to install tile directly to plywood, you have to use the A118.11 mortar. And don't get confused with A118.1, which is unmodified. If you use an A118.4 mortar on plywood, it'll stick to the tile, but it won't stick to the plywood. So you got to be very careful. So when you're looking at, when you go into a store and you're looking for a Thinset and you don't know which one to use, just remember, 0.4 is not good for plywood, and 0.11 and 0.15 are good for plywood. And it'll always say on the bag, it'll always say meets or exceeds ANSI A118.4. And then if it's a better, it'll say meets or exceeds ANSI A118.4 and A118.11. So a Thinset that's an A118.15, for example, will also be 0.11 and 0.4. So why you need different Thinsets anyway? Well, it depends on the substrate you're going over. If you're going to install, say, a ceramic tile on a concrete floor, then you could probably use an unmodified Thinset directly on the concrete floor, and it'll stick to both, because the concrete's very porous, the ceramic tile is porous, and the crystals can grow and penetrate into both surfaces, and you get a great bond. It will have no flexibility, but you'll get a great bond. So another thing you would use an unmodified Thinset for would be if you've got a concrete floor and you want to install, say, Schluter-Dietrich. You can use an unmodified Thinset to install your uncoupling membrane to the concrete floor, and you get a very good bond. I'm not going into the things you need to do to use that product on that surface. I'm just trying to clarify the products that can be used, not how to use them. So an unmodified mortar has very limited uses. If you're going to be using an unmodified mortar, then be sure that that's exactly what you need. The mortars that you're probably going to be using for most installations are going to be modified, and it's always a good idea to get a better mortar than a cheaper mortar. A higher ANSI standard than a lower ANSI standard, because you know the glue that holds your project together is a Thinset mortar. So if you go cheap on that, I'm not saying you will have problems, but where a better mortar would hold, maybe a cheaper mortar won't. So we have unmodified, and like I said, is ANSI A118.1, and then we have modified mortars. And the three standards for modified mortars are ANSI A118.4, A118.11, and A118.15. The top is the 0.15. The bottom is the 0.4. If you're installing a tile on a cement board, you want to use a modified mortar, and especially if it's porcelain tile. Now, I don't want to get into all this because, you know, one thing leads to another. So ceramic and porcelain are different products in the sense that how do you tell the difference between a ceramic and a porcelain tile? Well, for one, porcelain is denser and it's less absorbent. Ceramic is softer and it's more absorbent. The I'm not going to go into exactly how it's defined, but ceramic, vitreous, non-vitreous, unglazed, glazed, porcelain. The tiles are categorized by the amount of water they absorb. So a porcelain tile absorbs very little water. So you need a very good thinset to be able to adhere to it. A ceramic tile will absorb a lot more water, so a lower grade thinset will adhere to it very well. It's about those crystals intertwining and growing and penetrating into the surface. That's how it bonds. If you've got something that's very dense, it's harder for the crystals to grow in there, so you need a more adhesive quality to the thinset to get a good bond. And that's why, I keep on diverting and moving off topic, but that's why when you look at the back of a porcelain tile, a lot of times it has like a pattern, or it has grooves in it, or it has something. That's to promote a better bond. So getting back to the adhesive, to thinsets. So we talked about unmodified. Unmodified, you can use. It has very limited uses. Unless you, like I said, are using it for a product that is specifically asked for that product, like Detra or Curdy, then you're probably better off using a modified mortar. If you're installing a ceramic tile, like say a subway tile, ceramic subway tile, you could use a lower grade thinset. If you're installing a porcelain tile, you probably want to go to a higher grade thinset. Now, so we have the unmodified, and then we have the A118.4, which is a modified thinset, but it's the lowest grade thinset. If you're going to install a tile or a membrane on a plywood subsurface, then you can't use the A118.4. That is not designed to adhere to plywood. You have to step up to the ANSI A118.11 or better, which actually the ANSI A118.11 is actually EGP, which means exterior grade plywood. So it's designed to adhere to exterior grade plywood. You could go up to the ANSI A118.15, which meets and exceeds ANSI A118.1. I know all these 0.1, 0.5 can be complicated. Okay, so we have these three standards of thinset mortar: 0.11, no, 0.4, 0.11, 0.15. So why do we need three of them? Well, like I said, one is modified, and you can use it for like a ceramic tile that's going over a cement board, and another one is that you can use to go over plywood. One can go over plywood, the other one can't. In my opinion, it's better to always use a better grade of thinset, a better grade of thinset, so you know you've got a very good bond. Now, the 0.11, as I said, is for to be used over the minimum standard that you can use over plywood that will adhere to plywood, and then you got the 0.15. The 0.15 is referred to as an improved polymer modified mortar. What does that mean? Improved, it's better. So you could use that also over plywood. Another thing that polymers add to thinset, it gives it flexibility. If you've got an unmodified mortar, there is no flexibility. It's just a rigid material. If you've got a polymer, and depending on the type and kind and quantity of polymer, it adds flexibility and adhesive quality. So why would you need a 0.15 mortar? Well, for example, glass tile is a very difficult material to bond to. So you need a really good thinset mortar to bond to that. So you would use a 0.15, an ANSI A118.15 mortar. But you got to be certain that is actually good for the glass tile. So not all those thinsets 0.15 are actually good for glass. For example, I know, Schluter Allset, which is an ANSI A11.15 thinset, they do not recommend that for glass tile. But if you get like Tech Superflex, that is actually something that will be commonly used to install glass tile. They're both 1.15 mortars, but one is recommended, the other one is not. There are reasons for that also. I'm not going to go into that too much. I actually have a video on glass, on things you need to know about installing glass tile. I'll link to that so you can watch that if you're interested about that. So 0.15 has a better adhesive quality and will stick to usually glass. They also make thinset mortars that are specifically made for glass. I mean, this video could be hours long if we talked about everything, every kind of thinset. I just want to touch on the main types of thinset. So, and if you want to, there's a lot of important things to know when you're installing glass tile. So I'll link to that video in the description and in the cards as well. If you're installing glass tile, there's some very important things you need to know about how to install it and what type of mortar you need to install. So as I was saying, the polymers in the thinset add flexibility and more adhesive quality to it. The more difficult the substrate is to adhere to, the better quality mortar you need. So just to recap a little bit, unmodified mortar is the one with the most limited use, unless you add a liquid polymer to it and turn it into a polymer modified mortar. So that's an option. But I don't want to get into that. So the unmodified mortar has very limited uses. The more difficult the substrate is to adhere to, the better quality mortar you're going to need. Now, beyond these standards of A118.1.11, actually, start A118.1, 0.4, 0.11, and 0.15, there are additional qualities that can be added to the thinset to make it useful for other types of setting situations. For example, if you get a mortar that has a T at the end, so it's going to say it's got an A118.15T thinset. That means the thinset is a no-sag thinset. And I think the T stands for thixotropic, which means that it doesn't sag, it'll hold the tile up or help keep it from sliding down the wall if it's on a vertical surface. And those are usually used. Another important point: if you're going to be installing a large format tile, which today most tiles are pretty big. The most common size tile is a 12 by 24. So if you're going to be using a large format tile, and just quickly, the definition of a large format tile is any tile that has, any ceramic or porcelain tile that has one side longer than 15 inches. It could be a 6 by 24, it could be a 15 by 15, it could be a 12 by 24. As long as one side is longer than 15 inches, it's considered a large format tile. I'm going to go into what you need to do to install those. So a lot of manufacturers will make thinsets which have a T, which is at the end, which is a no sag thinset, and the properties on those mortars also allows for to hold larger, heavier tiles better, so that they don't sag and they don't push into the thinset and create lippage. So if you're going to use it, so if you a lot of times you can use a large format tile mortar. You can also use it for a smaller tile. But you probably don't want to use a regular mortar for a large tile. It'll stick to it, but it's probably better if you use a thin-set mortar designed for a larger tile. For example, Mapei makes Ultraflex. That's just a regular thinset, great thinset. It's an 1.811 mortar, so it's a very good thinset, and I actually use quite a lot of it. It's good for installing, for example, uncoupling membranes on plywood. So they make that, and they also make Ultraflex Lft. It's more or less the same thinset, but the Lft has other components to it which help with large format tiles. Another thing about a regular mortar and LFT mortar, the bond coat on an LFT mortar can be thicker than that on a regular mortar. So if you've got a regular thinset mortar, you can only go so deep. They all vary, but they're usually within like a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 thickness, that you can use a thinset mortar before it starts to lose its ability to hold its shape and it shrink and create problems. So if you use, so typically with a large tile, you're going to use a bigger trowel with a thicker bond coat. So you want to use a large format tile mortar. They're referred to as LFT or LHT, large format tiles, or large and heavy tiles. Those can have thicker bond coats. Some of them can go up to almost 3/4 inch. I wouldn't push it that far, but you got to be very careful when you're picking your mortar to make sure that you use the right one. So they can have thicker bond coats, and they won't shrink and sag when you use the thicker coats. So the T is for no sag. Then they've got E, like if you find an E at the end. And you can have a thinset that's got T and E. So T means no sag, and E means extended open time. So the mortar, if the bag, you look on the bag, and it can have a T, or it can have an E, or it can have an F, which is for fast setting. I use very little fast setting mortar. Mainly when I use a fast setting mortar, I'll use it for like wet shimming or something like that. But anyway, getting back to if you look on the bag, it's going to have a pot life and an open time. The pot life can vary greatly depending on the mortar that you're using. So what does pot life mean? You mix up the thinset, you mix up the thinset and you start using it. The pot life is the amount of time that will remain good in your bucket. So some will be an hour, some will be up to 4 hours of pot life, and anywhere in between. Ambient conditions and temperature will affect the pot life. So just be aware of that. So if you're working in an area where it's 50 degrees and it's damp, you're going to get a very good pot life. If you're working in a hot area where it's 100 degrees and it's very dry, pot life's going to be reduced. Same for open time. Open time is once you spread the thinset and you're ready to install your tile. The open time is the amount of time that that thinset will remain tacky and you can install a tile. Some thinsets are designed to have very long open times, and some don't have a very long open time for whatever reason. And again, ambient temperature and conditions will affect the open time. So if you spread some thinset and you go a long way and you start and just place your tile, make sure that the thinset is still good. So if it's skimmed over, that can happen very easily, especially if you've got like a fan blowing or it's very warm. What does that mean? So if you touch the thinset, and nothing transfers to your finger, then that has skimmed over and is no good. You got to remove it and start over and spread some more thinset. If you touch it and it transfers to your finger, then it's still good. So another thing about these mortars is they have specialty mortars. They will all adhere to one of these standards, but you can get lightweight thin sets, like an X77 is a lightweight thin set, and the aggregate is it's a different product, so it's almost very powdery. Another lightweight thin set would be, say, custom Pro Light, and those will have, depending on how they're made, will have better open times, better part life, better non-sag properties. So there's a million different kinds of thin sets that you can get, but they all adhere to one of those standards. So you could get a lightweight thin set that might be an A118.11, or you could get an lightweight thin set, which would be an ANSI A118.15. Just make sure, sorry, you check the standard and the use it for the appropriate tile and substrate. I never cheap out on Thinset. I always get top quality products. If there's a bag that's $15 and a bag that's $25, I'll always go for the bag that's $25 and not the bag that's cheaper. It's always better to use a higher quality Thinset than a cheaper quality Thinset. So another thing about these Thinsets is also how you mix them. Some are very sensitive to the amount of water and the mixing time and the slake time and then the remix time, and some are not quite as sensitive. So always read the bag. For example, you might get a Thinset that says mix it for 3 minutes and then let it slake for 10 minutes and then then remix it for another 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. To achieve the properties that are designed in that Thinset, you should mix it the way it describes in the bag. Some Thinsets, for example, actually I'm not going to name one. There are some Thinsets that you mix and you don't let them slake and you use them right away. But they all have one thing in common that you should never do. If you're using a Thinset and it starts to get stiff, never add water to make it smoother and softer and creamier. You can remix it to loosen up a bit, but don't add mortar. Don't add any water to it. After the Thinset has slaked, if it's one of those that have slake time, do not ever add water to it in any way. So getting back to the mixing, some will say mix, slake, remix. So what does this slaking thing mean? Slaking means that it's okay. So you mix your Thinset and you get all the powder of the product all wet and it's all mixed in and there's no dry spots, and then you let it sit. You let it set. Slake. What does that do? So what happens is the water penetrates into the molecules and it activates all the chemistry in the bag, so that you get all the components of all the Thinset is all activated. Then what you need to do is remix it so you get a good mix, and you breaking them up and you're making them all into mix with each other so that the product works properly. If a bag of mortar says it needs to slake, make sure you slake it. And another thing too, you'll just try this. If you get a bag of mortar and then you mix it, it's supposed to slake, and then you mix it, you don't mix it for quite enough time, and then you just start using it, you're going to find that mortar gets stiff really quick because it hasn't had the proper mixing and the proper slaking, and it gets stiff pretty quick. if you get that same mortar, you mix it to the proper amount of time, and you let it slake the proper amount of time, and then you remix it, you're going to find it works much better, and it will have the properties that it says it has. So a lot of times people complain about a mortar that doesn't work properly. It's not because it doesn't work properly. It's because they haven't mixed it according to the direction. So that's another important thing. So the point of this video is, and I know of like deviated and probably said a lot of stuff that may have been a bit confusing. The point of this video is to make sure you use the proper thinset for the substrate and the tile that you're installing. If you use, I'm going to go back to a couple of examples. If you use an unmodified thinset to install a tile or an uncoupling membrane to a plywood subfloor, you're going to have a problem. If you use an A118.4 thinset to install your tile directly to plywood, but if you do that, the thinset will stick to your tile, but it won't stick to the plywood. If you use an A118.4 mortar to install an uncoupling membrane to a plywood subfloor, the thinset will stick to the membrane, but it won't stick to the plywood. You have to use an A118.11 or better thinset. Check the bag. The bag always has the standard. Know what your tile is, and know what your substrate is, and know what the thinset you need to use to make the two work together.
Okay, so I got several types of mortar here, and I'm going to show you that they all have the standard on the bag somewhere. Where is it here? On this one here. Light, where is it on the bag here? I don't see it. It's on here. So there it is. It's on there as well. There's another one here. This has it on the bag. Also, right there. And this one right there. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the RX-X77. That's custom Pro Light. That's the Tech Ultimate Plus 6, and this is Mortar Ultraflex Lft. So they all have the standard on the bag.
If you do that and you mix it according to proper mixing directions, and you follow all that, you're going to get the pot life, you're going to get the open time, and you're going to get the consistency that the mortar is supposed to have. Use a large format tile mortar, LFT mortar, for a large format tile. Most mortars also come in gray and white. I pretty much always use white. They're exactly the same. There's no difference. It's the same standard. It's just a color. The white will always cost a little bit more than the gray. There are some materials that you have to use white. Like, for example, if you're installing a natural stone, you always want to use a white mortar. If you're installing glass, you always want to use a white mortar. I'll link to that video in the description. I'll also link to a previous video I made about Thinset in the cards and in the description. So I know it might sound confusing, but because there's actually a lot to know about Thinset, and the important thing is that you use a proper Thinset for the substrate that you're using. All the manufacturers make very different qualities of mortar. They all, if it says it on the bag that it meets the standard, it meets the standard. But a cheaper Thinset is always going to be inferior to a more expensive Thinset. The more chemistry in a bag, the more advanced it is, the more it's going to cost. The glue that holds everything together is the Thinset So you always want to get a good quality mortar to install your thinset. There are times when you can use a lower quality mortar. I'm not going to go what they might be. There are times when you can use that, but pretty much always it's better to use a better quality mortar than a lower quality mortar. So I hope I didn't confuse you guys too much. I know it can be confusing. So if you get a chance, check me out on Patreon. If you can support me there, that'd be great. Leave your comments in the comment section, and I'll leave some links to some stuff in the description as well, to my Amazon store and PDFs or whatever. But most important of all, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.